It melts on your tongue. It comforts you when you are sad, rewards you when you are good, and appears on nearly every holiday we celebrate. Chocolate feels like pure, innocent pleasure, a small, everyday joy. But the sweet bar in your hand hides one of the darkest stories in all of human history. Long before it was a candy, chocolate was a sacred and bitter drink, so precious that its beans were used as money, and so powerful it was poured out in the rituals of gods and kings. It was tangled up with human sacrifice. It crossed an ocean in the hands of conquerors who destroyed the empires that first discovered it. And to satisfy the world's endless craving for it, millions of people were enslaved. And here is the part almost no one wants to hear. The cruelty is not only in the past. Right now, today, much of the world's chocolate is still harvested by people trapped in poverty and by children who have never even tasted the sweet treat their labor creates. This is a story of gods and empires, of conquest and greed, of a bitter seed that became a billion-dollar industry built from the very beginning on the backs of the powerless. This is the hidden history of chocolate, where it truly came from, the blood that was spilled for it, and the uncomfortable truth still sitting inside the wrapper. And almost none of it is on the label. Our story begins more than 3,000 years ago, in the steaming rainforests of Mesoamerica, in what is now Mexico and Central America. There, growing in the shade of the great trees, was a strange and unremarkable-looking plant. From its trunk hung large, ridged pods, and inside those pods, buried in soft white pulp, sat clusters of bitter seeds. This was the cacao tree, and the peoples of the region would come to believe it was a gift from the gods themselves. The first to tame it were ancient civilizations like the Olmec, and later the Maya. They discovered that if you fermented these bitter seeds, then dried them, roasted them, and ground them into a paste, you could create something extraordinary. Mixed with water, chili, and spices, it became a dark, frothy, bitter drink. Not sweet, not a treat, but rich and stimulating, and unlike anything else on earth. To the Maya, cacao was sacred. It appeared in their art and their writing, was drunk at weddings and religious ceremonies, and was offered to the gods. They even had a god of cacao. This was not a snack. This was a substance that connected the human world to the divine. Then came the Aztecs, who built a mighty empire across the region. Cacao did not grow well in the dry heart of their territory, so it had to be imported from warmer lands, and this made it even more precious. The Aztecs valued cacao beans so highly that they used them as currency. You could buy food, cloth, even work with them. A single beautiful turkey might cost you 100 beans. Imagine a money that you could also drink or that could rot in the rain. The frothy chocolate drink became the privilege of the elite, of emperors, nobles, and warriors. Legend tells that the Emperor Montezuma drank goblet after goblet of it, believing it gave him strength and vigor. But cacao also had a darker face. It was linked to blood and sacrifice, sometimes given to those about to be offered to the gods, and its deep red-brown color was compared to blood itself. A drink of the gods, and a drink of death. For thousands of years, this sacred bitter drink belonged entirely to the Americas. The rest of the world had no idea it existed, until the day strangers arrived on the shore in great ships carrying steel and a hunger for gold. In the early 1500s, Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés arrived in the heart of the Aztec Empire. They had come for gold and glory, and in a few brutal years they would topple one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas. Amid the conquest, they encountered the strange, dark drink of the nobility. At first, many Europeans hated it. One traveler famously described it as a bitter drink fit more for pigs than for men. It was foamy, spicy, and bitter, nothing like the sweet flavors of Europe. But the Spanish soon found the key that would change everything. They mixed the bitter cacao with sugar, and with that single addition, the sacred drink of the Aztecs was transformed into something Europe would fall madly in love with. The Spanish tried to keep their discovery secret, guarding it as a luxury for their own court. But secrets like this never keep. Slowly, chocolate spread across the royal houses of Europe. It reached Spain, then Italy, then France, then England. Everywhere it went, the wealthy adored it. Chocolate became the ultimate status symbol, a fashionable, exotic indulgence sipped from delicate cups by aristocrats and kings. Special chocolate houses opened in London, gathering places for the rich and powerful. Doctors prescribed it as a medicine. Lovers exchanged it as a gift. It was thought to be nourishing, invigorating, even an aphrodisiac. But this new European craving created a terrible problem. Chocolate was made from cacao, and cacao only grew in the hot tropics of the Americas. As demand exploded among the rich of Europe, they needed to grow cacao and sugar to sweeten it on an enormous scale. That meant plantations, vast plantations in the New World and beyond, carved out of conquered land. And plantations on that scale needed an enormous supply of labor, working in brutal heat for no pay at all. The Europeans had already found their answer to that problem, the same answer they used for sugar, for coffee, for tobacco, and it was the most horrifying answer imaginable. For centuries, chocolate remained a rare and expensive drink, sipped only by the wealthy. But in the 1800s, a series of inventions would tear it out of the palace and place it into the hands of ordinary people. And in doing so, turn it into one of the biggest industries on Earth. The first great breakthrough came in the Netherlands. A Dutch chemist invented a press that could squeeze much of the fat, the cocoa butter, out of the roasted beans. What remained could be ground into a fine, smooth cocoa powder, easy to mix and easy to sell. He also treated it with an alkali to make it milder and darker, a process still known today as Dutching. Then came the true revolution. In England, a company found a way to combine cocoa powder, cocoa butter and sugar into a smooth paste that could be poured into a mold and set hard. For the first time in history, chocolate was no longer only a drink. It was a solid bar you could hold and snap and eat. The chocolate bar was born. Soon after, in Switzerland, two more pieces fell into place. One man discovered how to blend in powdered milk, creating the mellow, creamy taste of milk chocolate. Another invented a process called conching, slowly rolling and grinding the chocolate for hours until it became irresistibly smooth on the tongue. The bitter, gritty drink of the Aztecs had become the melt-in-your-mouth sweet we know today. Now the great chocolate dynasties rose to power, names that still fill the shelves: Cadbury and Fry in Britain, Nestlé and Lindt in Switzerland, and in America, a man named Milton Hershey, who dreamed of making chocolate so cheap that everyone, not just the rich, could afford it. He built an entire town around his factory. Chocolate became a symbol of comfort, of childhood, of love. It was wrapped in bright paper, sold on every corner, handed to soldiers in wartime, and tied forever to our holidays and celebrations. But behind the cheerful wrappers and the smiling advertisements, the engine that produced all this sweetness ran, as it always had, on the suffering of people far away. And that is the part of the story the industry has spent a very long time trying to keep you from seeing. To understand what chocolate truly cost, you have to look at who actually grew the cacao. From the very beginning of the European trade, the answer was the same brutal one used for sugar and coffee: enslaved people. As the plantations of the New World spread, hundreds of thousands of enslaved Africans were forced across the ocean and worked to death cultivating the crops that fed Europe's sweet tooth, cacao among them. The comfort in the cup was paid for in stolen lives, and even after the slave trade was outlawed and nations congratulated themselves on ending it, the cruelty simply changed its shape. By the early 1900s, one of the world's largest suppliers of cacao sat on two small islands off the coast of West Africa, São Tomé and Príncipe, controlled by Portugal. The great British chocolate firms, including famous Quaker companies that prided themselves on their Christian decency, bought enormous quantities of cacao from these islands. But there was a terrible secret. The workers on those plantations were not free. They had been brought from the African mainland under a system of so-called contract labor that was, in truth, slavery by another name. They were marched to the coast, shipped to the islands, and never allowed to return. When one worker died, another was simply brought to replace them. When this was exposed, it became a national scandal. How could companies that spoke so loudly of morality build their fortunes on hidden slavery? For years, the truth had been buried beneath the cheerful wrappers. And here is the most uncomfortable truth of all. This is not just history. Today, the majority of the world's cacao comes from West Africa, above all from Ivory Coast and Ghana. And on many of those farms, the people who grow the beans live in deep poverty, earning just pennies for a day of grueling labor. Investigations have found again and again children working on cacao farms, children who carry heavy loads and swing sharp blades, who do not go to school, and who, in many cases, have never once tasted chocolate. The sweetest treat in the world still carries, hidden in its supply chain, a bitterness that has never gone away. As the 20th century rolled on, chocolate became one of the most powerful industries on the planet, and the companies that made it grew into giants. Chocolate was no longer a luxury or even just a food. It became a feeling, carefully engineered and relentlessly advertised. Think of how it is sold to you. Chocolate means love on a certain day in February. Chocolate means childhood, hidden in eggs at Easter and stockings at Christmas. Chocolate is the reward, the apology, the comfort after a hard day. Billions were spent teaching the world to reach for a chocolate bar in every emotional moment of life. The scale became staggering. What was once the sacred drink of emperors was now churned out by the millions of tons, wrapped by machines and sold in every shop, airport and gas station on Earth. The global chocolate industry grew into a business worth well over $100 billion a year. But that towering wealth was built on a strange and troubling imbalance. At one end of the chain sat the enormous, profitable companies of Europe and America. At the other end sat the farmers, mostly in West Africa, growing the beans for a tiny fraction of the final price. A farmer might earn a few coins for the cacao in a bar that sells thousands of miles away, for many times what they were paid. For decades, the industry insisted it could not fully control what happened on the farms, that the supply chains were too vast and too tangled. Again and again, the big companies promised to end the worst abuses, to stamp out child labor, to lift farmers out of poverty. And again, deadlines passed, and the promises were quietly pushed further into the future. In response, a movement grew. Fair trade labels appeared, promising a better deal for the people who grow the beans. Ethical chocolate makers tried to build honest supply chains. Consumers began slowly to ask a question that had been ignored for 500 years. Where does my chocolate actually come from, and who paid the price for it? It is a question that brings us at last to the bar sitting in front of you today. Today, the average person in a wealthy country eats several kilograms of chocolate every single year, often without a single thought about where it came from. We give it to children as a reward. We wrap it in gold foil and shape it into hearts and bunnies and coins. It is one of the most beloved flavors on earth, a small, reliable pleasure in a difficult world. And there is nothing wrong with that pleasure. Chocolate is genuinely one of the more remarkable things our species has ever created, a bitter forest seed transformed through thousands of years of human ingenuity into something close to edible joy. But the same plant that gives us that joy is now under pressure as never before. The cacao tree is delicate. It grows only in a narrow band of hot, humid climate near the equator, and a warming, more unstable world is putting that band under threat. Disease, drought, and aging farms are squeezing supply, even as global demand keeps climbing. The price of cacao has swung wildly in recent years, and some now warn that truly cheap chocolate may be living on borrowed time. And still, at the root of it all, sits that old, unresolved injustice. The people who grow the beans remain among the poorest in the entire chain, while the pleasure and the profit flow, as they always have, to the other side of the world. So the next time you unwrap a bar and break off a piece and let it melt on your tongue, hold two things in your mind at once. Let yourself enjoy it. It is the inheritor of a truly extraordinary history, sacred to the Maya, drunk by emperors, and adored across the whole world. But remember too, everything it carries. The gods and the empires, the conquest and the chains, the children in the cacao groves who have never tasted what they grow. Because that small square of sweetness is one of the most beautiful and one of the most troubling things in your entire kitchen. And almost none of it is on the label.